Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our council chambers on this beautiful August 31st day. It is the very last day of August, and it looks like it's going to be a pretty nice one. So welcome to the special meeting that is scheduled today at 1 p.m. As you can tell, there is a agenda, and there's one item that we'll be discussing, which is the temporary mandatory face mask. Members of council, anything to ask questions on for clarity? Councilor Meyer, make the motion to adopt the agenda, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council adopted the August 31st, 2020 special council meeting agenda as presented.
Okay. Thank you very much. Administration, anything to add?
No, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. I'll call questions. All in favor? Okay, and that is carried. Moving on to bylaws 3.1. Go ahead, administration. You guys have been tasked with the motion from our last meeting to provide some information back to council. And go ahead with the presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you just mentioned, special council meeting of August 24th. I'll just reiterate, council passed a motion to direct administration to prepare a temporary mandatory face coverings bylaw to be presented on August 31st, 2020. Couple of highlights that I'll point out as opposed to going into in-depth review of the background information. Your Worship, a couple things to point out. Clearly, the bylaw in front of council for consideration uses what could be considered a trigger enactment. This bylaw itself is set to kick into place when the town of Stony Plain would be added onto the Government of Alberta's watch list for COVID-19. Again, for clarity, Your Worship, if the town of Stony Plain was identified on the watch list as per this written bylaw in front of council for debate, then masks would become mandatory within the town of Stony Plain. There are other options that are noted in the report, and I believe council is aware from previous reports as to different manners in which council can direct the mandatory wearing of face masks within the town of Stony Plain. The bylaw itself includes definition sections, some of the regular or items that you would see in any particular bylaw. It does speak to indoor public places and public vehicles specifically. Your Worship, when we were reviewing the other bylaws and researching, and as noted before, this bylaw does generally align to those within the Edmonton metro region. There's a list of exemptions that are relatively standard across the region at this point in time. On that note, Your Worship, I will speak a little bit to the further administration of the bylaw in any form, whether it's on a watch list trigger, a specific number, or in fact coming into effect immediately. If you were following on the news, I believe the City of Edmonton had some challenges with their exemption clauses and application processes and so on and so forth. At this point in time, administration in our perspective would not seek to have an official exemption listing or application processes or so on and so forth. We would generally try to educate the public, work with the public if they had questions and along those lines, but we wouldn't look to administratively initiate an exemption listing and roster, so to speak. Again, aligning with most of the bylaws that we've seen, there are overall exemptions for institutional uses, hospitals and schools and so on and so forth, which tend to have their own specific processes, regulations that are coming from authorities other than the town of Stony Plain. The final note that I'll make clearly for council's consideration is that should this be enacted by council, should council see fit to enact a bylaw that would trigger in one way, shape, or form, this would be a bylaw that we wouldn't seek to actively enforce. We would, again, continue to work on educating the public if it was in place, if we were called out to any particular challenges. I'm certain that we would respond and, again, try to help people understand the rationale, the reasoning, the requirements, and so on and so forth. But Just to be clear, we wouldn't be out actively enforcing, i.e. driving around, checking businesses, so on and so forth for compliance with it. I think the other thing, maybe just to be one other that jumps to my mind, would just to note that you know, for a business that's in operation that has a form of public-facing area and a form of I would say private or an area that's not, you know, I mean, having the public access to, it wouldn't apply there. It's basically how they're written and how they're being utilized. So, quick example. Even if you pick the town of Stony Plains town office itself, with this bylaw in place, it would be, you know, the mandatory face covering if you enter into the town office through the front doors. But that wouldn't necessarily be the case. It would still be up for the town administration, so to speak, to enforce anything behind the counter. So a private business with a back end sort of is not required to have this you know, mandatory face covering. It's only on the public facing side. Your Worship, I know that the Mayor and Council is aware. We've done some more education. We did have a survey that was presented to you last week for some of the engagement or participation process. Further down in the RFD, you will note that there's 2 potential amendments. Again, in scanning across the region and I think throughout the province, there's other ways that these things are being brought in. One is with a specific case number identified, and the other one is almost not upon an immediate effect. So again, for simplicity and clarity, the City of Edmonton is in effect right now today and has been for quite some time. I believe St. Albert and Beaumont are similar to that. Spruce Grove, and I think the majority of the other metro region communities have some form of a trigger, so they're not required at this particular time. When that trigger gets hit, whichever it is, the bylaw comes into effect, and mandatory masks are required in those particular communities. So those 2 are provided. The wording for those changes are provided in the RFD should Council see fit to go in that direction. Your Worship, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. Certainly able to answer some questions or provide any further clarity that Council may have at this time.
Thank you much for your presentation. Okay, members of Council, any questions of clarity and understanding from the presentation that was presented by the Town Manager? Councillor Loy?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Administration. I refer to page 11 of 13, penalties, 6.2.0. And it's, I'll read it here. It says, a person found guilty of an offense under this bylaw is liable to a fine in an amount not less than $100. Could I ask Your Worship there for clarity, can a peace officer, whether it be our own peace officer or the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, impose like a $400 fine or a $700 fine? When we look at the other ones, I think it says that this is the fine, where this I see some ambiguity, and I'd just like a bit of clarity, please, sir.
Yep. Good question, Councillor Loy. Administration?
Thank you, Your Worship. I can speak to a bit of that, and I may ask for a bit of a clarification from our General Manager as well. So you'll see, as Councillor Loy has indicated, there is, you know, the procedures laid out for violation tickets and the amounts therein. So specifically to the question from Councillor Loy, Your Worship, when it's worded like this, there is authority and the authority exists for a peace officer or an RCMP member, I believe, to go above the $100. It is clear in the wording that it's amount not less, so they do have some ability to go higher than that if they so choose, I guess, based on the situation. So I believe that's a clear answer that yes, that is a possibility. A little bit further on that, you know, when we were, you know, in discussion about the administrative side of this particular bylaw, again, we would look for education. We would look for dialogue to help people understand the rationale, the situation, and the requirements. I don't know that I mean, our first go-to would be fines. I don't know that we would look at that as a punishment type conversation. But that, so that would be the administrative directive, if you want to call it that. But clearly, and just, I mean, to be crystal clear on that, the bylaw does allow for fines to be issued in this, along this bylaw enforcement. And it does allow for an amount anywhere, so to speak, over $100 to be utilized as a fine amount.
Okay. Councilor Lloyd, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Just for a further point of clarity, that wording can be found in similar type bylaws that are in our general area. I believe, sir, that you said that in your researches that this was the type of wording. So we're not the only ones, I guess. This is common throughout.
Your Worship, I wouldn't go so far as to say I believe it. I know that it's common. I know that the few that we did specifically see, that I specifically saw myself, I mean, it's the wording is similar to that. Your Worship, just a little bit of leeway. I would ask our General Manager if there's any clarification he would like to make on who, in fact, is able to issue and enforce this bylaw, whether that's our peace officers, RCMP, so on and so forth.
Your Worship, members of council, and through to Councillor Loy. Typically in our bylaws, often we do have a fine structure that you will find in an appendix that will outline certain fines, sections of that particular bylaw, and it'll have a specific fine related to that section. This has a one fine, which is $100. I think the reason why it says an amount not less than $100 is if the same person contravenes the bylaw multiple times in a single day, it would be $100 for each violation, as opposed to $100 one time for the violation that the peace officers were engaged with on that particular day. So I think it gives them the flexibility to issue multiple fines to a single individual, not just a single fine to an individual for not wearing a mask. So our peace officers will not make a determination whether or not Councillor Lloyd deserves a $1,000 fine versus Mayor Choi a $100 fine. It would be a $100 fine for the violation of not wearing a mask. However, that being said, a half an hour later, you may issue another $100 fine to the same person. So that gives them the ability to, the total sum of a particular violation would equal more than $100 for this particular bylaw violation.
And one more follow-up to that, sir, though belaboring this. Is there the option then to not put the fine and make it mandatory court with circumstances that any magistrate or judge can then adjudicate how they see fit?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Loy, I don't know the answer to that question. Certainly can ask and reply back via email to council related to that. But at this time, I do not know the answer to that question. I'll try and seek it before the close of the meeting.
Yeah, because this is try to get 3 readings here done today to pass the bylaw. I do not want to belabor this, Your Worship, but they are concerns.
Okay. Thank you very much for those questions, Councillor Loy. Maybe just a question to add on to that. You know, looking at that enforcement and the penalties, would it be advisable to add a cap? Like if it's no less than $100, that can be no more than 500? Because as mentioned that you can get multiple tickets in a day if you contravene the bylaw. So what is the maximum cap? Because if somebody's making a statement and they don't want to and they get caught 10 times, then is that $100 each time? That's $1,000. I know some other bylaws have a first offense, second offense, and then recurring offenses after is a certain amount and it stays that amount, so it doesn't escalate.
Your Worship, I'm not sure if there's a clear question there.
Could we put a maximum amount?
Yeah, certainly I mean, that's within the purview of council, yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Councillor Laurie, questions of clarity and understanding?
Thank you, Your Worship.
I'll just start quickly, follow up on yours and Councillor Loy's comments. Out of reviewing the 8 other bylaws in the Edmonton metropolitan region area, majority of the bylaws use the same wording that we use, of the up to $100. One bylaw goes as far as to talk about court. I believe the sentence is no more than a fine of $50,000 and or a year in jail, which I thought was a little bit extreme. The City of Fort Saskatchewan is the only bylaw of the 8 in the metro region that actually has a schedule. Their schedule is $100 for a first offense, and for a second or subsequent offense, it's $200. But they've also included something interesting. It's the interference with a person in the exercise or performance of the person powers pursuant to the bylaw is a $250 penalty for the first offense and a $500 for a second offense. So if somebody was confrontational with a peace officer about the mask bylaw, they would actually be eligible to receive a larger fine rather than just simply the basic fine for not failing to wear a face covering. The question I do have in relation to the bylaw that was presented to us is for exceptions, section 4.2.0, item A. Exceptions of persons under the age of 2. In comparing the 8 bylaws that are in existence in the metropolitan region right now, 5 of the 8 bylaws use the age of 10 years or older. 1 bylaw uses the age of 5. 1 bylaw uses the age of 2, but there is an exemption stating if under 5 and cannot be persuaded by a caregiver or refuses to wear. So essentially saying 5 again. And there's only actually 1 bylaw, the City of Edmonton's, that puts the age of 2 and older as the mandatory for or as the exception. So can administration explain if a majority of the bylaws are stating 10, the Chief Medical Officer of Health in schools is stating an age of 10 or grade 4, why is the town of Stony Plain suggesting an age of 2?
Thank you, Your Worship. To be straight, I don't know that there was a great deal of review consideration. When we start reviewing, I know that a couple of them were changed, I believe, in the 3rd reading by council up to 10. I can't remember exactly, but Your Worship, that's the draft that we utilized, as a template. That's what was on it, and that's what we left on it.
Thank you. Any more questions of clarity and understanding? Councillor Laurie again. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just for clarity and understanding, because this does state public vehicle in the face covering sections, but I just want to make clear for my understanding that our public vehicles in our accessible transportation service currently require masks, and I believe we are looking at our transit services starting at the beginning of the year, and this bylaw is dated in effect until March 31st. Will we be requiring face masks on ATS continuing? And will we be requiring face masks on our transit service as a matter of policy, not necessarily bylaw, when that service is available?
Your Worship, as the transit systems get built out, so to speak, whenever that does come to pass, if this bylaw still is in place or we're still in a COVID-19 situation, they would be requirements on public transit. And that would be preferred to be handled through administrative directive as opposed to council-approved bylaws. So.
Any more questions of clarity? Okay, go ahead before I ask mine. Hopefully it's all asked.
Thank you, Your Worship. A question through you to administration. Section 3.0.0, the in effect, referring to the last sentence where it says, shall remain in effect until 14 days after the watch designation is rescinded. Again, in comparison to the bylaws, the City of Spruce Grove has theirs in place until 30 days after the watch status is rescinded by AHS, and 2 of the other 3 bylaws that have a trigger point, they are strictly council resolution. Can administration speak to why we chose 14 days for when the watch designation, or for when the would remain in effect date would be?
Your Worship, there's probably 2 things I can comment on there, and Our General Manager of Corporate Services may wish to speak a bit to the resolution side too, if I don't cover it off clearly. 14 days, again, I mean, the rationale there, I'm not sure that it's strong one way or the other. In my own perspective, I guess my opinion, I mean, again, we would be deferring to the government of Alberta's expertise as to when we come off the watch list. That would be based on, I mean, the entirety of the bylaw is based on utilizing their expertise and not ours. Simple. We come off a watch list 14 days after the fact. I mean, from what I understand, COVID symptoms can show up anywhere from 8 to 10 days later, so on and so forth. That might cover it off there. I do know, if I understand correctly, that that number was changed, I believe, in Spruce Grove at the council table, and I don't recall the rationale myself that was behind that. The one thing we did change from some of the bylaws, you may have noticed, will be there is a clear in effect on the trigger, but there's a sunset clause on the bylaw itself. There is no ability for council to enact it by resolution specifically. When we ran it through our legal overview, that's the basic general understanding that was provided was simply, as soon as council passes the bylaw and the watch list or not is included, that's the trigger. Should council wish to enact it sooner, it would have to come back as a bylaw amendment, so to speak, and not just by resolution. And I maybe just will ask our general manager if you'd like to add anything further in her dialogue with our solicitor.
Thank you, Mr. Town Manager. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. The only thing that I would add that the lawyer commented on is that he felt that, in his legal opinion, this just made the bylaw legally enforceable, stronger, that, if council wanted to change the bylaw, they should really bring it back by bylaw and not have the bylaw refer via resolution. And I thought that was good advice, and that's why we've removed those clauses.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Lowry. Any other questions for clarity before we move on? Okay. Let's see here. Oh, there's one question that I still have that was not asked. Looking at the proposed bylaw is the repeal date of March 31st, 2021. I guess my question is why that date was proposed. Do we have an idea of when the pandemic might be over and phase 3 might be initiated in the province of Alberta?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I can make a few general comments as well on that. So the repeal date shows up in this one. I believe some of the other ones it doesn't have a clear repeal date, some do. In this instance, yes, we felt that a clear end date to this bylaw is required. So just for a scenario, so if frankly, COVID-19 subsides, something happens, something different, which is beyond my ability to predict. But it's no longer a concern in the Canada, Alberta. This bylaw would automatically fall off the books, so to speak. In the event that leading into March 31st, there's still COVID-19 concerns in communities in the province, we would have to come back and get council to alter that, extend it, so on and so forth. As for the timing, Your Worship, there was not a great deal of what I would say science or forecasting that went into it. I picked that date myself, Your Worship. I simply looked at it and said, well, this is the situation for at least the next, 3, 6, 9 months. Felt like March 31st was an acceptable date, that if nothing has changed, then we have to come back to council and get it reviewed.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Bennett, Deputy Mayor, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just clarification on, I thought that the discussion was on the March date when we referred to our solicitor. But that's, I just need clarification on the bylaw immediately upon passing, which is number 2. So did you say then that the bylaw shall take full force and effect immediately and not on a specific date in September. Just a clarification on that.
Yeah, Your Worship, I'll try to walk through this with some logic to it. So, I mean, should council see fit to pass the bylaw as presented, as worded, with a watch list trigger, the bylaw itself comes into effect upon third reading. So it is the bylaw of the town of Stony Plain. The masks themselves, the mandatory wearing of masks, would only come into effect when the watch list is triggered, or when we hit a watch list number, which I believe is 10 or 11 or 12 or so on. When we are designated on the watch list, that's when the active aspect of the bylaw comes into effect, which is wearing masks. I'll take a bit of a side issue there, or a side comment, that should council see fit to choose one of the amendments presented, which includes a hard number, or the second choice would be to bring that mask wearing, the mandatory mask wearing, into effect immediately. That would have to be changed by resolution during these readings of the bylaw. And thirdly, if I'm still on track with the question, the repeal date would just be, that's when the bylaw simply ceases to exist as a town of Stony bylaw. So whether it's triggered ever or whether it's not triggered, it would come off the books, so to speak, and would no longer exist, is the way I would put it. I'm not sure, Your Worship, if I was clear, if I answered the question, but I'll stop there and get any follow-up.
Thank you. So Deputy Mayor, yes, so the in effect is if we accept the bylaw as presented, then it only kicks in if we're added to the watch list by Alberta Health Services. I think you were mentioning before that you would like to have it immediate, and that can be a conversation and a motion to amend later. Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Matties, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to follow up with that question then, if we're looking at March 31st versus, for example, the end of the year 2021, if we expect that COVID-19 could be around for a very long time, and I mean, we have this council that could possibly see COVID come to the town, have escalating levels, go back down again, and then now take off and still have that bylaw in effect if that was the case, if we had that bylaw. So why so quickly? You know, I guess, what is the urgency of it versus, say, the end of the year 2021, giving a full year or so to address, issues that could potentially come to the community?
Your Worship, again, I mean, I wouldn't comment that there is any particular urgency to the repeal date. Again, I mean, bylaws sometimes, if they don't have repeal dates, they technically go on and on forever. This is a bylaw that's very specific to a specific issue, a specific concern, a specific action. So, I mean, administratively, we just felt there needs to be a repeal date. The repeal date itself is I mean, I'll just say, I mean, when asked, again, I think our solicitor said you might want to have a repeal date on this, and in discussion with the general manager, it was just simply picking a date. And I believe this lines up with the end of the first quarter of 2021. Best understanding of mine is that, I mean, we'll still have some activity going on with COVID-19 at that point in time, and there could be a dialogue of council at that point. But I mean, that's the rationale. It's not set in stone, hard logic, or you mean a lot of specific clarity into it. It's a date that we felt was simply an opportunity to review if need be. If not needed, then it's just done. And that could be March 31st, could be December 31st of 2021, could be any point in between, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any other questions for clarity and understanding? Councillor Laurie?
Thank you, Your Worship. One that popped to light with some of the conversation that was going on. In several of the bylaws that have a trigger on them, they state specifically who that is to be enacted by. So for instance, the City of Spruce Grove says the provision of this bylaw may only be enacted by the Director of Emergency Management if the Government of Alberta places the City of Spruce Grove under a watch as per their existing COVID-19 case thresholds. Ours doesn't state who essentially is responsible for enacting the bylaw. So, you know, we understand that the trigger exists, and the trigger is when we're on the watch list. But I know some have the town manager, some have the DEM. I'm just curious, is that wording that we might consider adding to this bylaw for clarity, or did administration intentionally leave that out because they don't feel it's necessary to be clear?
Okay, good question, Councilor Laurie. Go ahead.
Yeah, Your Worship, specifically on that note, yeah, that, you know, I mean, our first draft that was sent to our solicitor included those clauses that are being referenced. Those ones I think are specifically in Spruce Grove and a few other ones. But, I mean, our solicitor just simply, I believe, and General Manager can fill in too if there's something I missed. But, you know, I mean, I think that the general comment was just simply that, you know, I mean, those are not required. The bylaw itself, when it's adopted by council, is simply there's no choice for the DEM to enact it or not enact it. It's very clear as to what's being laid out. So it was a recommendation of our solicitor to remove those clauses. And I'll ask if the general manager wants to add anything further. She's saying no.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarity. Okay, any more questions of clarity and understanding? See none, thank you very much for the presentation and for the answering the questions so that council has some clarification and understanding of what the bylaw all entails. Moving on to 3.1, I'm going to ask Councillor Plechko to make the motion, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. That council give first reading to the temporary mandatory face covering bylaw 2638/H/20 for the purpose of temporarily mandating the wearing of face coverings in indoor public places and public vehicles.
Okay. Thank you much, Councillor Plechko. Again, members of council, we had the presentation. So this is now accepting for first reading where we can actually debate and try to convince other members of council to your way of thinking, and maybe it should be this way or maybe it should be something else. So again, I have a few questions that I might like to propose some changes. So if you guys do not make them, then I will be passing the chair over and I'll make those amendments myself. Okay, so open the floor. Thank you, Councillor Plechko. Conversation, debate. Go ahead, Councillor Meyer, you're first.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a bit of a prepared statement. I fear almost borderlines on a speech, so I'll just kind of dive into it. I did try and keep it short, but I thought there was a lot to it. It does wander, so I warn you guys, please do pay attention. Okay, so I went out and knocked on a lot of doors, and I was searching for what is reasonable. This is sort of the theme of what I kept asking when I was out there. What's reasonable? So I do believe mask wearing can be an effective tool in an attempt to limit the spread of COVID-19 if it became necessary in Stony Plain. That is based on the assumption that the masks are of an appropriate quality and that the wearer is doing so correctly. This belief is tempered by the reality that people will be wearing masks that will widely vary in quality. As well, individuals opposed will actively resist, which will limit a public health mandate's efficacy. I wish to be clear. I do not believe that 3 active cases in our town justifies the mandating of masks currently. The people of this town and neighboring communities have done a good job of following provincial health orders, and despite the many individuals that travel in and out of Edmonton daily, these have been effective so far. I have no reason to doubt people's continued reasonable compliance with them. I also do not believe the town of Stony Plain needs to mandate masks because the province already currently strongly recommends them when the 2-meter rule cannot be maintained. I would encourage the town to increase its messaging around this directive. So where does this leave me? I've already stated I believe masks can be an effective tool, while at the same time acknowledging Stony Plain's low case rate does not justify a mandate on masks. Seems pretty clear that I would probably support a temporary mandatory face covering as presented. But when a local municipal politician is asked to mandate a health decision for others, it's important to pause and ask a few philosophical questions. Like, what else could a council be asked to mandate? For example, I understand that people are taking hydrochloroquine as a prophylactic. How would people feel if that was what was being discussed here today? Or I imagine this decision having precedence for other decisions. For example, as we are all expecting a vaccine at some point, the question could become, how comfortable are you with your local school board member mandating vaccines for your children? If a counselor can make a health decision for you, why can't the school board make it for your child? To be clear, I'm not opposed to vaccines, but I put parental choice at the foreground. Speaking of children, what effect is all of this having on them? I observed a little boy the other day, scared to pick up a ball for fear of COVID. In my wife's day home, which has run throughout this pandemic, she has taught the littlest of ones to wash hands. These little guys can be taught to follow basic hygiene. Why now do we think that we cannot achieve this in the classroom? What about freedom of choice and personal accountability? In this case, this choice inherently needs to be weighed against our responsibilities to public health, but it certainly raises the question of what is reasonable to expect people to do in the name of public health. Preventable comorbidities such as obesity and diabetes are the major risk factors for individuals who are not of advanced age. Will council be asked to address these in the future as well? I also want to articulate another concern I have, and I know that in addressing it I risk being misunderstood, but it's important, so I ask, please listen carefully. I'm also not suggesting that there are any easy answers, but what I'm saying is it's got to be part of the conversation. So here it goes. The individuals that stand to benefit the most from this mask mandate and other COVID-related measures are almost all retired and will not repay any of what this will cost society. Conversely, the young are the least at risk, but are without a doubt the ones that bear the costs the most. When such an imbalance of cost versus benefit is apparent, I cannot help but suspect that there will be negative consequences. What they may be, I do not know. The media has been slower to cover dwindling economic prospects and the correlating suicides that result, but have no doubt there is a heavy burden that awaits the generations that remain. Other reasonable questions I ask myself is, whose expert opinion do I rely on? The town does not have an epidemiologist on staff, so I, as a municipal leader, naturally turn to the province's guidance, which in my opinion is where this decision would actually be best decided. Such provincial-wide guidelines would also address my next concern in regards to working with our municipal neighbors and having a consistent position in the Tri-Region. Then there's the question of a potential second wave and the potential fallout from school openings and whether there is a value in getting ahead of the curve or whether this was considered when the province mandated masks in school. There is also a question of public trust and whether models and recommendations that have been inaccurate and inconsistent have created distrust and made practical attempts to limit COVID-19 more political. When I'm out shopping, I observe about 2/3 of the population already wearing masks, and I see many businesses choosing to enforce their own mask mandates. This, in my opinion, reflects people already making the reasonable decision for themselves and convinces me that the majority of people are reasonable and we therefore do not need a mask mandate. Finally, I want to address those that do not feel that rights or freedoms are a reasonable point in this discussion. If you'll indulge me for a moment, I'll use a little bit of poetry to convey a bigger idea. I'm reminded of a Chris Christopherson song, Me and Bobby McGee, in which it's sung, freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. So when I hear people using words like freedom and rights when describing why they don't want to wear a mask, which, in my opinion, truly is not an unreasonable imposition, I don't dismiss them. Instead, I think, gee, despite all the strain and sacrifices that people have already made, we have settled into a new normal. From the loss of businesses and employment, to the loss of freedom of movement and assembly, the loss of leisure and activity, the added childcare costs, the loss of school and all those extracurriculars, it must all be seen in a larger light. Our new normal was unthinkable 6 months ago. Many changes have had to be adapted to, and I think it's prudent that we only ask citizens to make further sacrifices when we indeed do need them to do so. For these reasons, I do not support a bylaw mandating mask wearing. If Stony Plain's caseload placed us on the province's watch list, I would consider it at that time. To me, this is the reasonable position. It strikes a balance that allows for freedom of choice while also allowing individual businesses to do what they feel helps them best. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Meyer. And then those are good comments. Thank you. Moving on. Any other questions, comments, debate? Councillor Laurie, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'd like to thank Councillor Meyer for his comments. There were a lot of really good comments in there. The last part is what struck me in talking about the, when we hit the watch list, then might be the time to consider it. And I would argue that that is exactly what the bylaw in front of us is looking at. We see how long it's taken for us to get to today, when we actually finally have a mask bylaw in front of us. This has been talked about in many conversations at council. It has appeared to us in previous meetings, and it has taken this long to finally get it. I have the concern that once we're on the watch list, if that is when we first started exploring putting a bylaw in place, like actually physically adopting a bylaw, that could still take several weeks, if not longer, for it to actually become in place and enforced. And so with what you're stating, if you would be willing to consider that a mask bylaw when we hit the watch list might be an appropriate action, I think that's exactly what this bylaw in front of us is saying today, is that we are not being asked to mandate masks in our community today. We are being asked to take a step to determine when we feel might be best to have masks in our community. And I take a lot of your comments, and again, I think they're great, and you talk about at what point in time, or when do we allow people to make decisions for themselves? And I think, again, this bylaw addresses exactly that. From now until such a trigger point, we are allowing our community to make a choice for themselves, and hopefully make a choice that will prevent us from even ever having to trigger this bylaw and enact it. But the flip side question to that is, at what point in time do we act in the community's best interest? And we do that all the time in these chambers. Most recently, we did it with cannabis, and we talked about where cannabis should be sold, where cannabis could be smoked, where it can be consumed. And some of those conversations were because of public health. It's the same around smoking, and why smoking isn't allowed in restaurants and in certain vehicles and things like that, because the impacts of smoking have effects on other people. It's why, dogs barking, wind chimes ringing, all of those kind of things exist within our bylaw for the good of our community. And what we're looking at here is a possible bylaw that, in theory, it's not necessarily us talking about we're directing health. It's a good of the community bylaw. The chief medical officer of health in the province has already spoken very clearly on this. They have spoken because they control the schools. The municipalities don't. We have no ability to direct in the schools. They do. So what did they enact? They enacted mandatory face coverings in schools for those above the age of 10. The province also came out and clearly stated that they were leaving it up to the municipalities to make the decision because the varied landscapes of caseload, density, and exposure potentials in communities. And I think we very clearly have seen that, because where are the major epicenters? Very dense communities, very highly populated communities. And so I think it was a good choice by the province, even though it would be easier for us if they made a strict mandate to state this is what it is. But as you said, if the province mandated that everybody must wear a mask in every single space, would that be the right choice for the town of Stony Plain? I can't say it would, I can't say it wouldn't be. Now, we would go by it because that's what the province stated. But they have said, we are here, and we know our community best, and we know how we feel in our community and how our community feels about it. And we saw it in the survey. This is very divisive. It's very split. For every person you can find that says that masks are a farce and a complete unnecessity, You can find another person who says that they are the greatest thing since sliced bread and everybody should be wearing them 6 months ago on, or everybody should be wearing them 365 days a year, as many people do in other countries in the world, for their own protection and for the protection of others. You talk about a cost versus benefit to different societal members and different groups, and I think I see the other side of that coin, because I look at that as why, if this is going to cost certain members of society money in the coming years, should we not consider the value of the life of a person who would be more at risk of COVID-19 and the potential outcomes of that than a younger person? There's no value on life. It's invaluable. But your comments around the cost of what this is going to cost us, I'm sorry, but that I can't agree with, and maybe I misunderstood them. I hope I did. But the way they sounded did not sound right, so I certainly hope you'll take the opportunity on that. I like our bylaw for the most part in the way that it is presented, but your worship, if allowable, I'd like to propose an amendment.
Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, your worship. I move that we amend section 4.2.0, item A, to the age of 10 rather than the age of 2, and I'll speak to that when ready, your worship.
Okay, just wait, I'll give administration a minute to have that written up. Okay, Manager, are we ready? Okay, thank you. Go ahead and you can speak to it, and then I'll open the floor for discussion and debate.
Thank you, your worship, and thank you for the accepting of the amendment. Simply put, the Chief Medical Officer of Health has already put a mask mandate in place in our schools, and in that mandate they have stated that the grade of 4, which is around the age of 10 and below, do not require masks. This is the advice from our Chief Medical Officer of Health of the province. This is the person who we've been entrusted to provide us with the information for us to go on for these types of decisions. Also, when we look at regional continuity across the board, we have 5 of the 8 jurisdictions in the metropolitan region with bylaws in place who use the age of 10 and only 3 who use an age lower than that. Therefore, based on those reasonings, I feel that the age in our bylaw should be amended to that of 10.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, members of council, so we're addressing the amendment that's put forward. So, age of 10, good, bad, indifferent. Okay, see no hands up. Councillor Lloyd, please.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Just wanted to give a little thought before jumping right in. I'm personally comfortable with the 2 and under in our bylaw. Our bylaw does not have to reflect all the other bylaws or the majority of bylaws that are out there dealing with this case. I'm just as concerned about our 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds as well. So I personally, Councillor Laurie, can live with the under the age of 2. Thank you, your worship.
Okay. Thank you. I will support the bylaw, the amendment to the bylaw. I believe that through, I think everyone around the table here has acknowledged that we don't understand what's going on. We're not the experts, and I will always rely on the Chief Medical Officer. And if there is a reason why it is 10 for her to announce, then I do not see any different for within the town of Stony Plain. Any more questions before I call the question? Councillor Matthews?
Thank you, your worship. I just want to clarify. So basically, you're just making a determination as to a change from age 2 to age 10. We would still be debating the overall bylaw thereafter?
Yes, so this is just the amendment on this one section.
Okay.
Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, and that is carried, and that has been amended. So, just for future reference, council members, when we're looking at your bylaw, it is now changed till 10. So if you can just cross it off if you have it, or just mental note as we continue to debate the bylaw. Okay, any more questions, comments?
to Councillor Laurie's comments.
Let's wait until we do the roundtable first to see anyone else, because I did open up and you made comments, and I'm now letting people make their comments. Councillor Bennett, go ahead. Deputy Mayor, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to propose an amendment to the bylaw.
Okay.
The amendment that I would like to propose is number 2 in our implications of decision. And that is that Town Council amend bylaw 2638/H/20 to delete sections 3.1.0 and amend section 8.1.0 to read, this bylaw shall take full force and effect on September 8th, 2020. I choose that date so that there's enough time for publicity to say that this is the change in the bylaw. And I'd like to speak on this and open the debate.
Go ahead.
My basic premise for making this amendment is that the town of Stony Plain just seems to be reactive in this whole situation. Why is it that we should wait until we reach the watch level, where what we can do now is use the full toolbox that our chief medical officer has provided and has recommended for us, which includes wearing face masks when in public places. I don't want to wait until we become a watch. I think that by amending this bylaw, we can prevent our numbers from increasing. And I think that should be our top priority, is starting to lessen the effect of COVID on our residents and making sure that we do not reach that level of the watch.
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor, I don't know if it's within procedure as we're doing amendments that I can also make closing remarks.
If you like.
Thank you.
I will judge that. Okay, members council, so the amendment by Deputy Mayor is to remove the trigger point. That's section 3.1.0. So that means if the bylaw has passed as it is, then it will be effective September 8th, as Deputy Mayor has mentioned. Okay. Quotes, comments, debate on the amendment. Councilor Manning, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just need to fully clarify what is just being presented. That are you saying that this actual bylaw that we would require people to wear masks in Stony Plain as of September, or are you saying that this bylaw that we would be on, if the watch list, if we became on the watch list, that this bylaw would take effect? Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, so
on September 8th, the watch list requirement.
No, so Councilor Matty, so the motion was to delete that section, so it's no longer attached to a trigger point, and it comes in full effect September 8th.
Oh, I would not support that at all.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, I will provide my comments. I will not support the amendment, Deputy Mayor. I think it comes with a lot of good intentions, and you made some really good ones about making sure that we do not become a watch list candidate. And you said we should use this bylaw to enforce all the tools in the toolkit. But this bylaw does not enforce or address the other recommendations by the Alberta Health Services, such as stay home if you're ill, such as social distancing of 6 feet or more, such as regular hand washing and sanitization. So just to have a mask bylaw, because we think it's going to be good to slow down or flatten the curve, may also provide us false sense of security if people think that's all they need to do is just to wear the mask and we flatten the curve, which is not the case from what I understand from the health officials. So I cannot support the amendment. Councilor Pechman, you had your hand up before I let.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, through to Deputy Mayor. I can't support something like that either. I think it's important that we have the opportunity for our residents to be able to move within our communities, both with or without a mask. It gives them, today we're giving them the option still that allows our residents to make a bit of decisions, which I think is a good choice for them. Traveling within the community and talking to several people, lots of people already wear their masks, and it's a good thing for them to be able to do that. And it still gives them the clear opportunity as well as those that don't. It also helps us to get a bit of a handle on what is actually going on within our community as well. There's an opportunity through what the health tells us that and I've read contradictory things on that just recently through the World Health Organization. It's not 2 meters, it's actually 1 is what they're saying. So, you know, I think there's still not enough knowledge on what this does or doesn't do. I tend to agree a little bit with what I heard Councillor Myers say as well, is that, you know, there's no proof today on what is a good mask and what is not a good mask. There's some recommendations, and everything I've read to date is a 2-part mask. However, I see lots of people wearing a 1-part mask out there. So people are trying to do the best that they can. By us being put on the watch list, my question would be to administration at this point in time. Would that, if we seen a rise all of a sudden, would that allow us to be able to have a look at this one more time and be able to decide whether it's a necessary thing for our community at that point in time? Or is this basically a watch list? We get the watch list, it hits the numbers that we become under that watch list, it now gets enacted.
Your Worship, I can provide a bit of comment there. So specifically, the bylaw adopted, would be what guides administration. So if it says watch list or a number or immediately, that would be the direction, so to speak. Your question about, is there an opportunity to revisit or rethink or consider or what have you? I guess my comment is, a good chunk of COVID-19 and its impacts on all of us has forced or required us to rethink things and come back to things that we maybe thought were completed or done. And the only thing I can speak to that a little bit further, Your Worship, is that I know when we deal with our internal staff management stuff related to COVID-19, we do often say that if circumstances change, then we will change with them. And I would expect, council would have that dialogue generally in the community. And, should the notion come to have a reconsideration, that would be on the table for council as most anything is at any point in time. But the bylaw as adopted would be what would be the direction given. So,
thank you. Any other questions on this debate with amendment before I let Councillor Bennett, our Deputy Mayor, close her arguments? See done? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been listening to all the points of view, reading all the surveys. I understand this is a very divided issue, very divisive. And as a member of this community, that's the last thing I want, is to divide this community. But I think that we have to consider the fact, and it is a fact, that some of our residents, and I'm speaking of seniors and people who have compromised immune immune systems are truly afraid to go out. So I heard reference from one of the previous speakers about people being able to be free to walk about town without a mask on. Well, we have residents who are afraid to walk and to go about their community activities and social activities because people are choosing not to wear a mask. We talk about precedents when it comes to a bylaw such as this, where we are actually imposing some restrictions on people's freedoms and rights. People bring up the precedents of seatbelts or wearing a bicycle helmet. I would say that those precedents speak to people, and these are laws that have been enacted that protect themselves. You wear a helmet to protect yourself. You wear seatbelts to protect yourself. The precedent that I'm thinking of for this bylaw is the smoking bylaw. Can we just think for a minute how divisive that bylaw was? Where Spruce Grove was not allowing smoking in their restaurants, and Stony Plain was allowing smoking in their premises, and the talk was, where are we going to eat? Well, whichever one fits your situation. That law came to effect to protect other people. It's your choice to smoke or not. It is not your choice to have the secondhand smoke affect other people. And that is exactly the same with this bylaw. It is your choice whether or not to wear a mask. But with that choice comes responsibilities. And the responsibility to others is a very important and serious responsibility. So we can debate this issue, to wear one, to not to wear one, in public now or when the watch happens, but to be respectful of people who, and I'm referring now to seniors who have built this community, who are now afraid and limiting their activities because people do not take wearing a face mask seriously unless a council, in this case, because we have to make the decision, unless a council says it is mandatory now, not in the future, but now. You know, and to me, it's just such a simple matter. Put on a mask. It's not a big deal. I wear a mask to protect you. Please wear a mask to protect me. And vote in favor of initiating this bylaw on September 8th.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Your passionate plea and your thoughts and comments. I'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? That is defeated. Right, Deputy Mayor, I'm going to pass you the mic. You have the chair.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, you have an amendment?
Yes, thank you. Madam Chair, I'd like to make an amendment to section 9.0.0, repeal date. Under this bylaw that is proposed, the repeal date is set for March 31st, 2021. This is a global pandemic that we do not know if there is an end now, in the medium term, or in the long term. And I tend to want to have this bylaw enacted if we choose to do step alongside with the provincial health orders. So I'd like to change that so that the bylaw is repealed once the provincial health orders are removed. At that point in time, we're relying on the experts, the Chief Medical Officer and Alberta Health Services and the World Health Organization. If there is no global pandemic, those orders will be removed. Then that means this bylaw automatically is removed. So instead of having to come back on March 31st, if there's still a global pandemic, to extend it or come back early to remove it, that takes it out of our hands. It is not political. It's driven by the experts. It's driven by the World Health Organization. It's driven by Alberta Health Services, the people that understand the virus, not us, not political leaders. Okay. So that is my amendment, and then I look forward and ask for your support.
Are there any questions, discussion? Councillor Laurie?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. More question to administration because I support the amendment and how it's proposed. I'm just questioning to administration, how clear is that definition? Is that definition clear enough? Which public health order is it? You know, is there something specific that the province has declared that we can tie this to? I'm just, you know, the province may change the public health orders based on how we've moved on. Does that impact the bylaw? I like the premise, I like the idea, I'm just not certain about the application.
Administration?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think I heard the wording of provincial health orders or World Health Organization. I think just, again, I'm sort of thinking out loud to a degree here, Your Worship, and the rest of Council. I would likely choose a reference to the provincial health directives or orders. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to ask my General Manager of Community and Protective Services if he's aware of any specific order that could be cited or not cited. But before I do that, perhaps again, I think I understand the concept is to turn it over to some higher more expert authority as to when the pandemic, so to speak, is declared null and void or whatever the wording will be used. But it may not necessarily be the clearest way. I presume there's a number of different health orders. There may be a all-encompassing one that sits atop them that is utilized. I'll maybe just ask the General Manager if there's anything he can add further to that.
Okay.
In his head, no. So, Your Worship, and sorry, back to the question from Councillor Laurie and through the Deputy Mayor. Wording that references the provincial declaration or removal of public health orders, I believe would set an understanding of when the bylaw would be repealed. I don't know that we have to get increasingly definite. I think when that day comes, we would be, there'd be a consensus that this is passed, and there would be some form of a declaration of sorts. And that, I believe, is what we would probably use as a guide to repeal. I'll stop there, Deputy Mayor. I'm not sure if there's much more I can clarify or if there's any further questions on that.
Did that answer your question, Councillor Laurie?
Enough, yes.
Any other discussion? Councillor Matties?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just a question on that. So basically, looking at the government of Alberta, basically we declared a state of emergency in March of 2020, and then that expired June 15th, 2020. I kind of trying to understand what exactly, what order, what anything would do this. So I think that would have to go back to get some clarification on that. I can't support that without knowing what exactly that means, because I don't know of an order that at this point that would allow us to have a time frame.
Okay.
Your Worship, if I may, I just maybe can add a little bit further to this discussion for clarity. And I'll try to explain this in it's sort of a reverse logic. So, you know, I mean, if council is to change the release or the end date of the bylaw, so to speak, and base it on a provincial designation, whatever that may be, or the removal of that designation, it stands to reason that at that point in time, the watch list would also be removed. There would be no watch list because there is no more designation. So one way or the other, the bylaw would not actually have any impact, if you want to look at it that way. That would not be the case with the amendment of a specific date. You know, a specific date amendment, which I acknowledge was put forward and defeated, brings a lot of different discussion in to repeal dates and so on and so forth. But by utilizing the watch list, it's actually the watch list that activates anything to happen. No watch list, no pandemic, no bylaw is probably the logic I would point out there.
Thank you. Any other? I will make a comment then. It seems to me that having a specific date, such as the one that's in our bylaw, gives us an opportunity, no matter what's happening, for us to have another discussion. And so as Councillor Maddie said, the World Health Organization declared it a pandemic, and then the provincial government enacted all of the follow-up from that. And if the World Health Organization doesn't, then it just kind of goes on and on and on. I like having a date where we can at least bring it back and discuss it. And I think that was the point of having the date. At the end of Q1 in 2021, there was a specific time where we bring it back and we discuss it. So I can't support that amendment, Mr. Mayor, because I want it to come back at that time and see what's happening. Maybe we don't need anything. Maybe we need to continue it. So that's my discussion. Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll call the question.
I'd like to close.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the comments and fellow questions that are provided by my fellow councillors. And I agree with you that, but you know what, there's some kind of questions about who declares what. We've already said many times that we're not the experts. So why do we want a date for us to come back to debate it? I don't think any of us are on track to get a medical degree in the next 6 to 8 months that has the idea to decide if we should continue with the health order or not. We rely on the World Health Order. We rely on our bird health services. Right now there is classified as a global pandemic. At that point in time, I believe that if we have this bylaw, it should be in effect with a trigger point. When there is no more, when the World Health Organization declares the pandemic over, the provincial government will follow suit and lift the provincial health orders, etc., which then repeals this bylaw. We don't have to do it. We're not the experts. I hear people want to talk about, you know, we hear from these people and these people. You can Google anything you want on the internet and you can find 1,000 for and 1,000 against. Who do you listen to? Well, we need to put our trust in somebody and somebody. And for me, that is the health experts of Alberta Health Services, our Chief Medical Officer, and the World Health Organization. So that is why I made that amendment, so that we don't have to make this a political game of going back and forth. And I ask you for your support. Thank you.
All those in favor of the amendment? All those opposed?
It's passed.
I couldn't count fast enough.
It's 4-3. Yes,
And so that passed.
yes.
Okay, moving back to the original. I'll give the chair back to the mayor. That's what
Thank you,
I'll do.
Deputy Mayor, and thank you, members of council, for the conversation. So far, we've had 3 amendments, 2 have passed, 1 has not. So the current bylaw that is being proposed has the age increased from 2 years to 10. And then also, it has the amendment to when this is appealed will be based on the Alberta Health Services. Okay. Any more questions and debates on the bylaw that is currently proposed before us? Amendments? Councilor Mattis, go ahead.
Your Worship, if I may speak for a little while, and I might have a question or two in between, but I'd just rather be able to, as Councillor Meyer did, just explain myself.
For sure.
And that would help, I think, clarify my thinking on this. So starting with what a bylaw is, because I went back to look at that. And the basic principles for administration to create bylaws that are understandable, enforceable.
Councilor Mattis, can I just get you to move your notes this way and use the mic? Sorry.
Understandable, enforceable, and accomplish the council's desired goals. So when I'm looking at this, when I was reviewing this with the MGA, it said, because the bylaw is enacted according to the statutes of Alberta, there is an expectation that bylaws enacted will be municipally enforced. So they will be enforced. As we look at this bylaw, it indicates that it will be considered on a voluntary compliance and trust basis. And so right then and there, that gives me a little bit of a question as to is the intent of a bylaw being carried out with this particular proposed bylaw today? Then, when I look at the purpose of why we would even consider something like this, it's because we as a town have to keep COVID-19 out of Stony Plain, and preferably the region. But that requires the will of the people based on a clarity and understanding of the risks that we face as a community, as an individual, as a society, so looking after our neighbor, but also the economic well-being of our community. If we do not keep COVID out of this community, we're in trouble. We're already challenged economically moving forward. But if this comes back to the community, it's a big problem. So when I look at this, I look at the value of an education program, a targeted education campaign. Last meeting we had, last special meeting, it was a discussion that we can use Alberta Health information and use that as our education platform. But, you know, bottom line is, I looked at a couple of other provinces. I looked at a Smarty Pants equivalent video that really simplified the information, explained to people why COVID is a risk, how it's spread, what we need to do, good examples. There was also educational, one-page educationals that had animated pictures, really very clearly explained, again, what does social or physical distancing mean? What does washing hands mean? All of these things are critically important for our community to move forward. When we talk about having a fear, I have you know, elder family members, and bottom line is wearing a mask isn't going to, it's going to give you a sense of safety when potentially it's not the safe thing, because it is a tool, one tool in the toolbox in order to prevent COVID. So number one, I believe that when we're looking at a bylaw, we need to look at, all the factors surrounding this bylaw. And one is one heck of an amazing education program in this community. And we have the best communications department in the region. And I'm not sure why we would think for 1 second that that wouldn't be the #1 priority that we would do to get the will of the people working to really protect and save this town. So that's number one. Number two, on enforcement. So there are 2 Government of Alberta ministerial orders that impact us. One is the 2-meter distancing order, so from persons in your household or cohort. The second order is on isolation. So isolation from, if you travel internationally for 14 days, you must isolate. If you have a confirmed case or have been exposed to somebody with a confirmed case, it's a 10-day isolation period. There's no ministerial order on hand washing, sanitation, and there are other orders for seniors, nursing home, facilities, schools, hospitals, daycares. Now, it was mentioned at the last meeting that the Government of Alberta and Health will ensure ministerial orders are enforced. Well, the 2 relevant orders that I talked about, distancing and isolation. Well, isolation is being monitored carefully. I know that people who have had COVID-19, they need to isolate, and there's a monitoring process for that. With regards to the 2-meter distancing, that's up to the RCMP. There's nobody else that can enforce that. So, and just to explain why, so community peace officers could enforce that when there's a state of an emergency. But as I mentioned before, that state of emergency is no longer in effect. So, and your bylaw enforcement officer cannot enforce it. So it's the RCMP that's going to enforce distancing. We know for sure that if we're talking about a mask, well, and a mask issue, well, it's also a distancing issue because they're close to somebody and they're not wearing a mask. So now, in this case, you've got your RCMP are not going to deal with that situation, and yet you could potentially have a peace officer look after the bylaw component of the mask component. It becomes quite complicated here. So then, I have to, so that's number 2. So basically 1 being education, 2 being how do we enforce it? Because as we've mentioned, we do not have the resources here in the community to effectively enforce. So we're going on a trust situation again, going back to the critically important value of a solid education campaign by this community, and I think we need to be leaders in the region in that. The third component of this is the community feedback and survey results. We've done a couple of surveys in the last little while, one being on VLTs and another one being on this. So in this case, we had the overall group were opposed, 54% were opposed, and 45 or 46% were in support of mandatory masks. Compared with Stony Plain, 49.21 were opposed. So, basically, somewhere close to 50 to 54% of the survey respondents were opposed to this mask bylaw versus the 46% overall and the Stony Plain 50.78 or 51%. Then you go to the survey and the respondents, so the residents responded, 58% of the residents responded to the survey. Then there was about 4% that were non-residents, and then there was a full 38% that were non-residents, but frequently visit Stony Plain. So these people that are visiting Stony Plain, they're either work here, they're going to shop here, they're going to eat at our restaurants, medical health appointments in this community. So if we surveyed them, then I think we better darn well take that into consideration that we had 96% of the survey either live here or visit frequently. Okay, so I do believe we need to consider the oppose of 54% on that survey response. Then the next question was, how often do you wear a mask? Well, overall, Between always and usually, it was 40% for the overall group. For Stony Plain, it was 43%. You add sometimes to it, so add the next level down, I sometimes wear a mask, 24% for the overall and 25% for Stony Plain. What that meant is that sometimes, usually, or always, overall 64% wear a mask, and sometimes, usually, always, in Stony Plain, 68% wear a mask. So the question is, if we had a great education program, how easy would that take to take that sometimes group and move that to the usually or always group? I had the opportunity to survey a few people myself. One individual, one of my neighbors, he said, he said, if the council in Stony Plain really wants to make a statement, he said that they should be wearing a mask most or all of the time. He said he wore a mask more than some of the time, but less than most of the time. And I've had others that basically say, give the will to the people, let the people choose. So as I'm going through my summary here, I believe that first and foremost, we need to be having a really strong education program. Secondly, I believe in empowering the people of our community. I think this is a very unique community and one where people want to do the right things and will do the right things when they have the information. Another point, I've been in Edmonton, I've been in Spruce Grove, and I've been shopping in Stony Plain. So I have physically been in every one. I was in IKEA, where the law enforcement guy is standing outside while you're in line, making sure you're 2 meters apart and have a mask on. But once you get in that store, there's no social distancing whatsoever. It's a party in there. And then my daughter was at Canadian Tire in Edmonton the other day. There's people there without masks because nobody in the store is going to kick you out of the store. And there's no bylaw officer sitting outside. And then again, enforcement here in Stony Plain is on voluntary compliance and trust. So finally, I truly believe it's not that I'm not supporting this bylaw, but there's a whole package here that I feel as a council that is leadership. It's leadership, it's empowering the will of the people. And I would really like us to have a full program to make this community strong moving forward.
Thank you for your comments, Councilor Mannies, and I did not hear a question in there, so we're good.
And with regards to the bylaw, there was meant to be a question, which was the bylaw officer, peace officers, who is going to do what?
Okay, I think the town manager mentioned that before. It is on compliance, and if we do receive reports, because if the bylaw is enacted, our peace officers do have the authority to enforce.
Your Worship, and I'll maybe just see if the general manager wishes to add anything further.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Matties, once his bylaw is enacted, our CPOs, community peace officers, would be the ones that would enforce it, and certainly the RCMP would have the authority to also enforce this bylaw. Just some clarity on the legislation. Provincial government provided legislation authority through the Solicitor General's office for us to enforce the 2-meter distancing. At some point, they decided that that was no longer necessary, and they removed that designation or that statute from our ability to enforce. So it's not that we did not want to enforce, it was just the government deemed that that's not the role or responsibility of a community peace officer under the Provincial Solicitor General. And the designations provided under that particular act, so they removed that ability for us to enforce. So now you're correct, that lies with the RCMP 100% because they are the next level of enforcement, or any designation of enforcement in a city. So a city police division would have the same authority to ensure that social distancing is in place, in addition to any bylaw that those cities may put in place. So as you described your experience with IKEA, their city enforcement would be out making sure that people are complying to the bylaw that they've passed, plus the provincial health orders that are in place. In Stony Plain, we would enforce the bylaw that council chooses to land on, if that's such a case. However, the 2 meter distancing would be the reliance on the RCMP to enforce that 100% in our community.
Thank you. All right, we go on. Any more questions and comments regarding the proposed bylaw that has been amended now twice?
Like an opportunity just to clarify my point earlier.
Okay. You can clarify your points. Again, this is, as mentioned many times, we do not take any things that we say in council chambers personally. It's just making a comment based on what we heard, and then we go on there. So go ahead.
Councillor Laurie just expressed some confusion, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to... Yes?
Yep, go ahead.
All right. So the idea that I'm trying to convey is a difficult one, I know, and I appreciate the opportunity to expand on it. Councillor Laurie, I am not comparing lives to dollars. I'm comparing lives to lives. So the best I've heard explained is for every decrease in employment, there is a corresponding and measurable increase in the suicide rate. So let me give you an example. Taking in an 85-year-old individual, right? We've taken all these COVID measures, and because of them, they survive. They survive another 10 years. Wonderful, right? Now, let's take a 30-year-old parent. They've lost their job. They see family breakdown as a result. Say it leads to suicide, whether from the parents or the children. What have we gained if that is the result? I'm simply speaking, and I know it's not an easy answer. I want it to be part of the conversation, though. So I'm speaking up for our generation, and we will be facing our own epidemic. It just won't grab the headlines, because it'll be further in the future when we all get past all this. So that's what I'm trying to convey. And when I was out knocking on doors, I often heard this misunderstood. You know, when people think that when people are saying we have to get back to work, people think, oh, you're worried about your paycheck over lives. And that is not what people are worried about. They're worried about their survival. And they know that there are knock-on effects from us continuing to not go back to work. So that's all I'm trying to convey in that mark.
Okay. So let's remind everybody, again, to address all your comments and questions through me as the chair. Okay. Okay, any more questions, comments, amendments to the proposed bylaw that is in front of us? And Councilor Pleshko, since I have asked you to make the motion, I'll let you the opportunity to close if you like, if you have anything else to say a little bit later on. Councilor Laurie, you have something else to say?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just some general comment. You know, we've heard a lot about this. We read in our briefing about enforceability and so on and so forth. And, you know, I wanted to start by saying, you know, Deputy Mayor, your comments, through Your Worship, regarding the enactment, I loved your impassioned comments. Your comments were fantastic about protecting our community, and I truly hold those values as well. But what I do feel we need to do is, we do need to give our community a little bit of a benefit of the doubt. To date, we have seen 9 total COVID cases in 6 months in the town of Stony Plain. To hit the watch list, we need 10 active cases minimum at one time. Our community has done a great job, as far as I'm concerned, in adhering to the public health orders and to keeping COVID out of our community and keeping our community members safe. Giving them the chance to do the right thing and giving them that choice, still remaining with that choice as to whether to wear a mask or not, I think is a huge benefit. But at the same time, I think it is our responsibility to put measures in place to protect our community. And by putting this benchmark in place, I think it only helps encourage our community to continue to do the right things. If our community understands that we have adopted a bylaw that does not require them to wear a face mask, unless we hit the provincial watch status, I feel that continues to give our community incentive to do the right things, to keep their physical distance, to wash their hands, to wear a mask if they choose to do so, in order to keep us off that list. We already directed administration to start an educational campaign, or restart an educational campaign, to which I want to thank administration, because over the last several weeks, I have seen a significant increase in that educational material. And to Councillor Maddie's points, I have seen a significant increase in people wearing masks voluntarily in the community. Again, these are all positives. But we also have other bylaws in our community that are for the public good that we don't necessarily enforce. So we have to remember that this isn't just about enforcement. We say you cannot run an extension cord across a sidewalk at -30, but how often are we out there enforcing that? We say you cannot ride a bicycle on the sidewalk in our community, but how often are we out there enforcing that? We say in our bylaws that if you are under the age of 18 years, you require a helmet, but how often do we enforce that? Many of our bylaws that we have are guidelines for appropriate community behavior. They're not just in place to be enforced. And putting this bylaw in, I think, is council giving a directive to the community to say, this is the behavior we expect of our community. Now, I would certainly like to hope, if the bylaw were enacted, if we hit the watch list, if masks were mandated, and somebody entered a business and chose not to wear a mask, and they did not have a reason why, if our enforcement was called, I would like to hope our enforcement would show up and our enforcement would enforce that bylaw if requested to do so. But I think it sets a precedence in our community of what we expect for behavior. I wear a mask when I cannot maintain 6 foot of physical distancing, and I encourage others to do so as well. But I will gladly wear a mask 100% of the time that I am inside of a business without this bylaw. However, I do feel this is the appropriate step for us to take. The Chief Medical Officer of Health directed municipalities to make these decisions. They gave us examples, they gave us some leeway, they gave us some guidance. They've put the mandate in schools. I think it's right for us to move forward, put this mandate in to protect our community if our community hits the level of watch. So I will be supporting this bylaw as it is written. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Laurie. Any other comments? Councillor Manning, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have a few, I guess, final comments. I support the following. And this is something, before I would consider supporting this bylaw, I would like to understand from administration, so through you to the administration, the advancements or enhancements that we could make to our existing education program, and what that would take to do that, so that we give our community the information that they need to do the right things, and that this bylaw is never enacted, because that's what my hope is. So I would like to hear from administration on that, and then I could finish my last few points.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Your Worship, I guess what the comments I would make there is that what I would expect that we would continue to do the level that we're at. I would expect it to be, I mean, some enhancement for sure, but frankly, Your Worship, at this point, I can't speak specifically to what's intended or what's coming out, so to speak, in a month from now or so on and so forth. I'm not sure if that was the question, but I can't speak specifically to what all is planned on the communication side.
If I may follow up, what I would like to see is a message for youth, seniors, targeted information, information that people understand with visuals, and so with pictures of people doing the right things, because we need to ensure that people understand and understand why it's important. And right now, I believe there's people out there that would go from sometimes to most of the time, and that would bring that up close to 70% of our population when we're going out would be wearing masks. You know, so education is important, and I'm not hearing the answer that I wanted to hear. So I'm not supporting this until I know that we will have an education program that really is strong and that makes sure that COVID-19 does not come to this community.
Okay, thank you. And I think we already have an education program, and I think there's a lot of education stuff that's happening in there. You're looking for more specific, which then you want to direct administration to do something, it'd be a separate motion. Councilor Loy.
I'm getting confused here, to be quite honest. Yes, I understand the point of education, and it's passionate by Councillor Matties, but we're dealing with this specific bylaw about whether we're going to be bringing in masks and when we're going to be bringing in masks, and what tells us that we have to invoke the mask bylaw, not education. So I'm confused.
Okay, so Councilor Loy, so the debate is on the actual motion itself. Yeah. Councilor Matty is just making a comment that she would like to see more upped-up education programming, which was then presented to council on August 24th, what the education campaign is.
But we're not at August 24th now. No. We're at the 31st, and this is what we're discussing. We're not discussing the bylaw, with all due respect.
So Councillor Loy, yes, so then I mentioned to Councillor Matters, if she wants to direct administration to do something, then that would come as a motion to say, you know what, I want to do this, and then council can debate it and support it, yes or no. So the conversation is that what is on there, the temporary face mask covering bylaw. And everything else is just comment and white noise. And white noise. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that we're winding up this discussion, and so I'll just state, I think publicly I've made it very clear that I'm in favor of face masks, that I see the benefit of them, and I think it would be irresponsible of us to not have a face covering bylaw. So I will be supporting this bylaw as I'm reading it on the screen right now, just so it doesn't slip through the cracks and we lose a face covering bylaw altogether.
Do you have something to say, Council Matters?
Well, I wanted to finish what I was going to say and reply to Councillor Loy. First of all, what I am saying is that to have one without the other, and I know we have some form of education coming, but I have been watching and I have not seen information that is clear and concise and good examples. And, you know, I had to go on the website today to AHS and look at what they had, and it's there, but it's not easy. It's not easy to, you know, or simple to read for maybe a lot of our population. And as we did, when we talked about recycling, we think, oh yeah, okay, we understand what that is. Well, you know what? We spent considerable effort in education getting people to do the right things. So that's what this would do. And supporting this bylaw, would only support it because I don't want it to go in effect, right? So then secondly, as I'm finishing up, so that number one is education is critically important. Walking the talk. So this was what was presented, that council should set the example by wearing masks most or all of the time. Town walk the talk. Again, maybe considering the town-owned buildings and facilities. If you know, as we just heard from the CAO, that would be a decision of administration as to what is done behind the client-facing areas. Well, you know, bottom line is, like, is that walking the talk in the town? Then, what honestly, I'd like to, I mean, I would support this bylaw if I could know that we had a strong education program. So how do I go about doing that? Do I wait till the next meeting to make, or can I ask for a formal education program that is targeting individuals so that we can accomplish the goal of preventing COVID-19 spread in Stony Plain.
Okay. Question, so I think, can administration recap what was presented on August 24th of what was amped up for the education process?
Your worship, I believe if you give me a couple of minutes here, I can pull up the report.
That's special.
Your worship, I can't find it that quick. I'm just gonna, I guess, go on to our own website and pull the report that we provided on August 24th, your worship, is what I'll be referring to. But if that's required, your worship, frankly, if that's what you want me to do, I'll do that and present it.
Okay, so Councilor Matthews, as you mentioned education, Councilor Laurie brought that up a couple meetings ago, and that was presented to us in terms of what was increased and ramped up, and Councilor Laurie has acknowledged that he has noticed an increase in that. So, and I've seen that as well through my social media feeds of the town of Stony Plain, that there is an increased exposure to COVID-19 and some of the practices that we need to follow. So if you're not happy with what's been presented, you're free to make a motion after this, or we can wait till you can watch what's happening on social media through the town's feeds, and then you can address it on the next meeting, which is next Tuesday.
Yeah, just to follow up, Your Worship, I have been watching the social media, and I have seen some information, without question. But what I'm saying is, like, information that's targeted, that was targeted like the education program we had for recycling. And my question is, for an issue that we have deemed to be so important, I mean, look at opioid crisis, equal number of people die of opioid crisis every year in Alberta as they're dying with this. Okay, so we need to be clear on that, but we don't have an education or a bylaw on opioids, or we can't have, you know, and so we have a crisis on that end without question. But I'm asking that to prevent a crisis here, how could we not have as the same quality of education program as what we had for recycling, which is equally, you know, it's very important as well.
So I just ask you to monitor it and then maybe give some thought to it, and if you want to bring something on the GMP meeting, which is next Tuesday.
What kind of thought do you want me to put into it, Your Worship?
What kind of motion you want to bring forward to direct administration to do something? So if you want to say, I want a motion to direct administration to provide social media education on COVID-19, face mask wearing, all the other good things, directed to this age group. Right, very specific so that we can debate it as a council, because as mentioned, there is generic stuff out there and maybe it's not hitting the target that you want. So give that some thought.
I will.
Because
thank you.
We can debate this for all day, all night, and we're still not going to get anywhere unless we have this clear direction. Okay, any more comments, debate on this? Okay, I will provide my comments, then I'll let Councillor Fletchko close. So ladies and gentlemen, that was a great conversation. It is a topic that has been on everybody's mind since January of 2021, and officially as a World Health pandemic in March, and definitely a huge conversation around the coffee tables in our families and throughout the TV, social media. Okay. So what do I think of masks? I think they're good. I believe that they're part of a toolkit that, if used properly with everything else, we can flatten the curve and keep COVID-19 out of communities so that our businesses and our residents can still move through freely and enjoy some quality of life. Okay. Are our residents adhering to those public health orders? I said this before, I think they are. Out of 6 months since the pandemic was declared in Alberta, we have 9 total cases, total. 1 active as of today. 24 in Parkland County, 2 active today. 25 in the city of Spruce Grove, 2 active today. Combining those active cases, that's only 5. Half the number that Stony Plain itself needs to enact a bylaw if we attach the trigger point to it, which I do support that trigger point, because that means it allows our residents to decide what's best for them and how they want to move around in the community. And having that trigger point allows us as council members to protect our community if a pandemic does break out here. We don't have to debate this again. We're setting motion in place to allow our staff enforceability to help our community stay relatively low in COVID. Because if we don't have this, I believe, if we don't have this bylaw, then when we need to deal with it, it may be already too late. If it's here, the way it is presented, that the temporary face mask bylaw is you don't have to wear one right now because we're not on the watch list. And if you don't want to wear one, then through voluntary compliance, we will keep those numbers low. Therefore, this bylaw would never be enacted. Looking at the surveys from our own community, I lost it. 38% said they really strongly supported it. 37% strongly opposed. And if you add those ones that were somewhat supportive and somewhat opposed, we're looking at like a 50.8 to a 49.2%. A very divisive issue and comment within our communities. Looking at the comments around this table, it is divisive amongst our own council members. That does nothing for our community. For building our community, we've strived to make sure our communities were great, welcoming, friendly. We're all going to have different ideas and thoughts of this. Is this a hoax? Maybe it is. But just give some thought. If the entire world shut down, that's one big hoax. You know what? Because we live in Alberta and in Stony Plain, we're relatively protected with the number of populations that we have, the fact that our residents are more compliant and are volunteering, following the procedures that are recommended. We see the numbers coming out of the United States. Over 1,000 people are dying from COVID-19 a day. Just think about that. In 18 days, the size of Stony Plain perished so far during this pandemic. That is huge numbers. And every life is important, regardless if they're 80, regardless if they're 2. Right? We as a council have to make a decision here of what is best for our community that balances the fors and the pros, the mandatory mask bylaws. I've been inundated with emails, messaging from people in our community and outside the community. The worst one that I received was that if I supported mask bylaw, I'm supporting child trafficking because then you can't see the child's face if they're getting kidnapped and etc. On the other side, the worst one is if I did not support a mask bylaw, I was assisting mass murder. That is the reality that we're facing right now. We as a council need to stand united. And I think this bylaw will allow us to benefit both sides of the argument. A bylaw that is enforced when we hit a trigger number. So if we do not want to have mandatory masks, then talk to our residents through education, through connections, through phone conversations. Voluntary compliance is the best way to do it, not mandatory. But if we have to go mandatory, then we need to do it. And this bylaw provides us that best of both worlds. Gives us the ability as our community to decide on something ourselves. We're all passionate about this subject because we all have heard it from our residents. I'm pretty sure you have heard from both sides as well. Okay? There's no magic bylaw that's going to fix this. And as the town manager says, we have many bylaws in our community that we do not enforce 100% of the time because we do not do that. We're not a state that we sit there and we enforce everything that we have. We ask for compliance. But the bylaw is there as a tool for peace officers and other enforcement officials to enforce that if it is required. This is it. Guys, we need to be united here. We need to finish this conversation so that we can address and educate our residents so that we can start moving together in our community to build it. Okay? No more divisiveness, because there's not going to be an answer that's going to fit everybody's solutions. Okay. So I will be supporting and ask you for your support as well. Councilor Pletchko, you made the motion. You may go ahead and close.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Well, that's a little bit of a hard one to follow up to, but I'll do my best. So I've sat here listening to each one of us, and I can tell you that I hear compassion, community, commitment. I hear residents. I hear a number of things that takes in this total community. And I would be hard-pressed to say there isn't any one of us at this table today that doesn't support the community. Our community is divided, and I can see we're divided here today as well. However, now's the time for us to be leaders within our community. And the way leaders in our community decide things is you come together for what is a good outcome to support the residents of our community. I believe that this is a very good start towards our community to look after everybody that's here. Those individuals that choose not to wear a mask, what it does is it allows them not to, but it also allows them the opportunity to. And by the good education that you talk about, Councillor Matties, I believe that that will help with that aspect. Those that choose to wear the mask, they have that protection for themselves already. And by wearing it, it protects them on both angles of it. Does it allow for their need to be move within the community freely? That is a choice that each one of us has to make. And I believe that there's no reason that they cannot move within our community freely and safely by wearing their own masks. So I think today this mask bylaw allows for everybody here within our community to be moving towards something that is already being told to us today by the health organizations. Wear a mask, wash your hands, keep 6 feet away, and you will prevent a lot of things. So by not supporting this today, I think we're telling the community that we're still divided as a council. And I don't believe for a minute here I heard today that we're not all positive towards moving towards masks. So this is a very good step in moving that way. So I would ask that each and every one of you consider prior to the call that you support this 100% and we move the community forward to protecting our community in all aspects of it.
Thank you, Councilor Pletchko. With that, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. Motion for second reading, Councilor Loy.
Is it going to come up? Oh, yeah, thank you. The Town Council gives second reading to the temporary mandatory face covering bylaw 2638/H/20.
Thank you. We've already had all the conversation and debate on it. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Matties, please, for unanimous consent.
The Town Council give unanimous consent to the third reading of bylaw 2638/H/20.
Okay. Thank you very much. And members of council and those that are attending and watching through our YouTube stream, if council does all three readings in one sitting, we need unanimous consent. So I'm going to call the question, but I do ask everyone for unanimous consent, because if there is not unanimous consent, then all it does is just pushes this further and allows us to be divided until the next council meeting So let's just, as Councilor Pacheco says, let's pass unanimous consent, and we can go to the third reading, and then therefore we can move on as a community to build it, to secure it, and then to make sure that we're strong and vibrant again. All in favor of unanimous consent? Okay. That is carried. Councillor Laurie, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move the town council to third reading bylaw 2638/H/20.
Okay. Last comments from anybody? Okay, on behalf of council and our residents, thank you very much, administration, for putting this together. I know it's a difficult process to come with a bylaw, proposed bylaw that kind of seeks a balance. So thank you very much. Members of council, thank you very much for your impassionate pleas and bringing what you believe best represents our community forward. And so that, we had some great conversation, and that will help us move forward in their communities. Because we can tell them that we had the same debate, same conversation that's happening in their households and their kitchen tables, right? And as we mentioned earlier, this is the best of both worlds. Those that are for mass and those that are against. All in favor of third reading? Opposed? Okay, that is carried. Thank you very much. And we're moving on to adjournment. We're done.